Falling Walls Circle, Challenges and Foresight.
Welcome to the Falling Walls Plenary Table. Frontiers Planet Prize. Can science save the planet?
Yes, well, it's an easy question, and by noon you will know the answer. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for the speakers and the guests to be here. I'm very pleased that we can have this round table on which is, of course, a vital question. We are addressing one of the biggest challenges of our century, aside war, peace and democracy, which is the survival of the planet. And the second question that we want to tackle is, of course, what can science do to help there and to support it, the solutions. So the Planet Prize, which is in the title of this session, has been created by Frontiers, a publishing company, created in the foundation. They created the prize in 2022. Inspired by two books. The first book was the work of Johan Rockström on the planetary boundaries. And reading that material, we realized, well, it's absolutely necessary we get our act together, so we have no time to waste. And the second book, because we are a mission-driven prize, we want to have an impact, is a book of someone who is now retracting a bit, which is Bill Gates, how to avoid a climate disaster. In those days, he was still convinced we had to avoid it, and we would not survive it just like that, as he said recently. I come back to that in a second. So those two books inspired us to create the prize, which is, if you want, a global competition for the best science published in a peer-reviewed journal, that an independent jury of 100 scientists, chaired by Johan Rockström, on an annual basis evaluates. And out of all the submissions, we have almost 750 universities globally competing. Out of all the submissions, a national champion is being selected. For Germany, we have Robert here, who was the national champion in the third edition. And out of all the national champions, an international champion is selected by the jury. And we have Zahra here from the Stockholm University, who is the international champion for the third edition as well. And the international champions, they get each, so we have 3 of them, each of them get $1 million to further and to continue their research and hopefully to take more risks and which they need, so that they are not depending from funding mechanisms to go forward. So that's the prize, a global competition, if you want, a bit like the Nobel Prize. We like to talk about ourselves that we are the Nobel Prize for sustainability, but we have a mission, and the mission is to have impact. So it's not about the beauty of science, it's about science that can make a difference, because that's what we need. And we have enough disciplinary rewards about excellence. We want rewards about how can, as a scientific community, we contribute to what Johan Rockström very accurately described yesterday, one of the biggest problems we are facing. How can we keep the doors, the window, he said the window for change and the window to cure it is still open. And that's where we, as scientific community, want to take our responsibility in creating this prize. Now, up till now, as I said, we have close to 61 national champions. If you look at it all together, close to 10,000 scientists in one way or another, because all these teams, all these proposals are, of course, made by teams. We have 10,000 scientists participating in the prize, so we have the community there, and we need it today more than ever, not only because of what Johan yesterday presented in a fantastic afternoon, which the Boston Consulting Group made possible, because we are transgressing 7 of the 9 boundaries, but also because of the general climate, which is changing. 5 years ago, there was absolutely no dissonance, more or less, in the global community that we should get our act together. Today, we have the president of the most powerful nation in the world, and also the one who is most responsible for where we are now, so to speak, historically, openly saying that this is all a hoax and that you don't have to believe in it, as if you can believe in gravity. I don't believe in gravity, so it will not fly. And on the other hand, we have, and that is really stunning, that we have very powerful, smart voices like Bill Gates trying to retracting. We will survive climate change, don't worry. It's a bit like we will survive malaria, so why care? So all these things are, we are in a changing world. On the one hand, the urgency is getting bigger. On the other hand, some powerful voices seem to hesitate or pull the brake. The US is clearly pulling the brake in terms of funding, in terms of supporting science. So in that context, and now I finished my introduction, in that context we have a fantastic panel here to address those issues. So how can we, as a scientific community, with the support of businesses, with the support of venture capital, with the support of foundations, how can we scale up the science, and at the same time, how can we incite more scientists to work on this topic? So we will hear first from our two scientists, Zahra and Robert, what was the science that made them win their prize, what they think is the next step, and then we open the floor to Johanna from the Boston Consulting Group. As you know, the Boston Consulting, at least that's how I see it, the Boston Consulting Group is one of the few big consultants, in my view, personal view. I'm emeritus, so I can say what I want. So that really not only tries to make money, but also tries to push the car in the right direction. Michiel, who is the president of the European Innovation Council, which is the closest you can get to DARPA in Europe, and you can demonstrate a very successful track record in venture, but the point is, of course, where does this problematic comes in. And then Genevieve, who represents the Moore Foundation, which is a very respected and very active foundation in everything that has to do with sustainability. So this is enough for an introduction. So Zahra, you are a millionaire. That's why I put on my tie. and as you see, my colleagues as well. So I will never again say that joke because I said it too much now. So no, please, Zahra, can you briefly explain what was the science that made you win the prize and how you see the next steps?
Thank you so much, Jean-Claude, and thanks for the audience being here, and then thanks for the invitation, actually, to be here. So, as we have heard, we have listened to the top scientists yesterday, and then the discussion that we have it. So, cities contributes to more than half of the global greenhouse gas emissions, I mean, the built environment. And at the same time that they have to reduce these emissions, they have to also provide buildings, provide housing for this growing population that we will have, and we have it at the moment. So the work that we are doing that got the recognition from the Frontier Planet Prize was to help cities to unlock the potential, the full potential of nature-based solutions, and not only to create a smarter, greener, healthier environment, but at the same time to help our planners, to the city planners, and also the other actors that are working in the built environment to achieve climate neutrality, carbon neutrality, which is actually, and also staying within these planetary boundaries that we have it. So there have been different questions that we have been trying to answer it, and we're still trying to answer. Some of them there are answers, some of them they need more attention, and thanks to the Frontier Planet Prize, actually we have got this investment and we have got this visibility and credibility to work further to answer these questions. For example, one of the questions that we have it as a research question that we are working actually, and we are asking ourselves is that which type of nature-based solutions? Because when you are looking at the nature-based solution, this is really an umbrella of different green infrastructures, blue-green solutions. And they have been always different names, that has come up, we need to live with nature, we live to, but exactly, which type of these nature-based solutions actually, or strategies, are more effective? So it's about their effectiveness in reducing the urban carbon emissions. And another question that we put it there as well was like, the second question was that what are the potential? If you are looking at it, so when it comes to the climate adaptation and mitigation, so what are their potential to be able to achieve, for example, carbon neutrality in our cities? So there are different examples we have been done in studies. Actually, we have been looking at different, their effectiveness. And so I have a colleague here that actually have been trying actually to look at the placement of this effectiveness as well. So if we put it here or there, it's going to matter. So, and as I said, so this placement is very important because we are looking at the whole city, scaling up. So if we don't want to just have the local solutions, we want to scale it up. And so the third question that we ask ourselves, okay, where we need to put them to be able to have the most effective impact of these solutions. So actually, we are working with the cities, with the planners to integrate our science into their daily life, to the climate action plans that they have written it. So how we can bring our innovative solutions to their climate action plans to help them to understand, to come up with better solutions as well in future.
Yeah, it's fantastic because I mean, in a few years' time, 60% of the world will live in cities, so we have to address that issue without any problem, without any hesitation. And on top of it, you show clearly the way out. So let me first ask then to Robert. You worked on water management. By the way, we will have Q&A at the end, so there will be room for questions from the audience. So Robert, from your science, what are the elements that you wanted to bring forward to that could keep the planet within the 9 boundaries?
The context of our work was rapid biodiversity decline. So one of the boundaries is biodiversity. My background is in fish, particularly, and there is a huge crisis, particularly in freshwater. So the biodiversity is declining. But at the same time, there's a nice situation that we have user groups that actually have ownership of lakes or even sometimes rivers, and they try to kind of address this issue by their means. And they are relying, in this case, fisher communities, a lot on a technical solution to the fish decline, which is to add more fish that are produced in artificial conditions. So they are bred together and then they are released. And as an ecologist, I was very concerned about this practice because I do think it will not address the fundamental problem of the decline, which is habitat deterioration. Mm-hmm. So we asked ourselves, how can we make the user groups accept alternatives? And how effective are alternative solutions, especially habitat restoration activities? So basically we said, rather than doing ivory tower research, we have to partner with these local user groups and ask them, what are your goals and which solutions do you consider viable? And we partnered with thousands of anglers, recreational fisher groups and angler organizations, and did replicated experiments in different management tools that people could implement locally. This is the scientific problem, because if you want to estimate restoration success, you need to replicate. And this is a major limitation in the current literature. So essentially, we went to these angling clubs and had a replicated set of lakes and experimented with different solutions, habitat restoration in 2 types, and adding fish, the standard solution the people usually take, and studied over 6 years the outcome on biodiversity generally, not only fish, but also other organisms. And it turns out that a simple habitat restoration activity implemented in lakes was by far the best option, which is not what the people currently do. Mm-hmm. And the tool that they are using is completely failing. So essentially, billions of fish are released every year, but they actually die, don't increase the population. So we could really completely change the toolbox that is viable for these local actors. The next step is, we had a 6-year project. How long-term are the effects? Of course, we only measured at a 6-year scale. So scientifically, the question is what happens in 10, 15 years with these systems. And from the implementation phase, of course, how can we scale this up? How can 10,000 of these user groups, which we exist in Germany, how can they kind of change their way of managing? And yeah, we are working on that dissemination as well.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. So to synthesize, both of you in a different context have diagnosed the problem clearly, but also the way out. Now, what do we need now to do to scale it up? How can we make it now a real-world implementation and not only an academic paper? Simple question.
Yeah, very easy question, thank you. First of all, let me say I'm so impressed by the Frontiers Prize and by the scientists that I've met. I actually only learned about this through Falling Walls, so I think we're already working on the dissemination here. Yesterday, I think when we talked about climate change, we phrased it very much as a macro problem, because of course it is a macro problem. We have the tipping points, our climate and all of the planetary boundaries are going to be breached, and we're thinking about like, what's a macro solution? Should we introduce carbon pricing? How do we get everybody around the table? And finding macro solutions is just super, super hard, because fundamentally we are in a tragedy of the commons where for every country, or for most countries or states individually, it's costly to act. Not in the long run, but in the short run. So I think what we have here around the table and what Frontiers represents is finding micro solutions that work in micro context, in cities, in habitats, and then scaling micro solutions that work and that people want, so that we make a change collectively through the micro world. So that is what impresses me, and I think it's a very actionable way forward that we should absolutely pursue in addition to the macro level, but I think the micro level can be more successful. So how can we do it? I think a prize such as the Frontiers Prize obviously gives visibility to these activities, because I think it's often a question of visibility. And I think it would be very helpful if we could, through events like this, make more connections between research that is successful on a micro level and companies or other organizations that have the power to implement it and to scale it. Because I think it's a scalability problem. Zahra, I don't know how many cities you work with, but the question is how can you work with more cities, right, to scale that up? So I think it's visibility. This is where the prize helps. I think it's events like this where people who are progressive come together to learn about these solutions. I think that's absolutely critical. And I think it's on part of companies such as BCG or our clients to open up and get closer to the scientific community to learn about these things.
Yes, indeed. And one of the things we should explore later on is what kind of new mechanisms can we invent there, because it's clear that the normal way of doing this, it takes too long time. Normally, science percolates always towards the economy, but it takes 25 years, and we don't have the time, so we need to speed it up. Now, Michiel, you're the boss of, or the president, of the board of one of the biggest investors in Europe, because we are a bit paralyzed about what we read about the US. But we still have a lot of brains and capital in Europe as well. So how you see your role as let's say, one of the biggest potential investors in this area?
Well, the role of the EIC is to have a mechanism to pull or to promote that science is applied into companies. It's only one of the four methods. One is basic public procurement, so basically innovation is taken up by governments, local, regional, national, to pick up. That's one thing. The second thing, it is taken up by communities. The third one by existing companies. But basically all those three are not sufficient. So the European Commission has installed 6 years ago the EIC, and the EIC is basically to promote the application of technology on innovation by startups. And I think it was my commissioner, Maria Vestager, who said, well, the current industry doesn't deliver. Mr. Scheffer, you have to make a new one for me. That's not entirely true. So it's one of the four methods. And the method we do is, so if you have 1 million, you have a basis to develop further your technology to, let's say, a TRL 6-7 level. And we are enabling it to pick it up at TRL 7 and to bring it to the market. And we do that with an instrument called Transition, which is very compatible with an academic environment, basically to refine the technology, to develop a business model. And the accelerator is a blend of grants and equity, and that enables with 2.5 plus 10 million to really to scale up a company, not on its own, because we never fund more than 25-30% of a company. It's always to seduce venture capital to come in. So we also want to reactivate the financial markets to be more, let's say, startup, scale-up oriented. And final thing is we are tiny and big. So we are big, 10 billion euros, 750 companies funded, but that's only 0.02% of startups in Europe. So it's huge and tiny. And what is also important, that the biggest challenge now is basically the absence of really large funding. So the US is much better in mobilizing hundreds of millions. That's something I will deal with that in the conclusion, but that's something still of a big challenge. And what is also a big challenge is to have, let's say, the large corporates and also the public markets to pick up the innovations that the small ones have scaled up.
Absolutely, but from your point of view, I mean, we have two ideas here. So, for example, you can easily imagine that an AI startup would take up the ideas and the models of Zahra and her group and create a kind of a new system around it, an implementation system. Idem dito for you. I mean, what you say is so common sense, Robert, in terms of making it implementing in the world of fisheries. So why is it not happening? Well, you cannot, because it's not the fault of science. In this, you can really not say the science is not there. It is there, but there is no take-up. So what are we not doing there to increase it?
But sometimes it depends. I mean, I know the water area quite well, but in the Netherlands, for example, if you have a water problem, you have 17 water authorities. and each of them have let's say, an area that covers 500,000 people. I live close to the German border. In Germany, a water authority is 5 fields and 1 volunteer managing the thing. I mean, that is uneven. So the public domain is not organized to address new challenges, and that's also so. It's not like, oh, the stars would do. No, I mean, the public domain also has something in organizing itself in order to be able to respond to challenges.
Yeah. I think you hit an important point there, and you also said it yesterday and now also, that we also have to re-engineer the surrounding system. That it's not only trying to implement the idea in the old system, we have to re-engineer it. I will give you the time to react to what you heard, but Genevieve, so you represent a very, very powerful foundation. And luckily, there is also your kind of foundations. So let me put it this way, because it's quite astonishing that some of the big funders, like Gates, and I don't want to single him out, but he was such an example. And when he closed down Breakthrough Ventures in Europe, which was chaired by one of the best Director-Generals I ever worked for at the European Commission, so it's quite astonishing. I'm not asking you to go into those details, but as a foundation, in this context, not only in your country, but globally, what do you think you can still do to increase the scaling up and to foster the take-up of relevant science?
Well, thank you. And I want to say first, just thank you for the opportunity to be here and to be with all of you. And I come to this wanting to acknowledge, first of all, that so many of these challenges feel like they are rapidly escalating and non-linear threats. And of course, I'm coming to this from a perspective where at the Moore Foundation, my work is largely around our Wildfire Resilience Initiative. And from a fire perspective, we see globally that the incidence and severity of fires has more than doubled, these extreme wildfire events, in the last 20 years. We also know that they're burning faster. So at least in the Western North American context, we know that the average peak daily growth rates for these fast fires has also more than doubled in the last 20 years. So it is very urgent, and we are literally seeing ecosystems and communities be incinerated and go up in flames in front of us. But that's the urgency part of the equation. But I will say at the same time, I also see some opportunity in the fact that technological innovation is likewise on an exponential growth curve, continued still, and something that we care a lot about at the Moore Foundation. Of course, I attribute part of this back to Moore's Law. The Moore Foundation and the man behind Moore's Law are one and the same. So thinking about that accelerating pace of innovation is so important too. With that technological innovation, we get all kinds of new opportunities for scientific breakthroughs, Earth observation, new kinds of models, and I think that is going to be delivering a lot of important new data and information for us. And at the same time, I think we don't want to be waiting for perfection in the kinds of systems and the data that we can get. And so what we want to be able to do is to still be able to work on changing the conditions on the ground with confidence, given what we already have in front of us, while also still tracking very carefully what's working well and maybe what's not working as well, and where there may be new kinds of information, data, and systems that are enlightening to us that we are managing adaptively overall. So I think I'm focusing more on the how part of the how are we going to scale, and I guess I would summarize it by saying it's so important to act with urgency, but also with the humility to understand that we're going to continue to learn more and evolve as we go.
So we actually need a Moore's Law in clean tech. Yeah?
Yes.
That would be great. We call it the falling walls law.
Yeah.
So no, absolutely. And can I now go back to the scientists? So Robert and Zahra, so you heard quite a few good ideas here. And can you, what's your reaction on it? And also try to elaborate on the point, but is the world of science doing enough? We can go on a long time on this topic, but we also have to look at that topic. Are we as a scientific community, we have 12 million scientists. Imagine in the world, imagine half of them would work on this problem and is solved in 5 years. I mean, making a shortcut now. But are we doing enough? So first a reaction on what you heard, and then are we doing enough, Robert? And what can we do more?
So I go back to my fishy case, because that's what I know to speak about. And what you said is essentially hitting the most important solutions, right? The first is we have communities of users that own the fishing rights in the entire landscape of Germany. They manage these fisheries. They have a high vested interest in making things better. Now we have a solution how to do that, which is habitat restoration under certain conditions. So how can you scale it up? And it's a micro problem, which gets a macro level effect if all of them do it. There are 3 constraints. The first is funding. Of course, people who join these organizations, they have a certain payment, so there's a certain base funding, but some of these activities cost a bit more. Not ridiculous numbers, but let's say 8,000 to 10,000 euro. This could be too much for a local community of users. So some funding support to make it happen is the first condition. The second is capacity building. I mean, we have done a hopefully nice project in a certain area. How can the others learn about the new solution? And this is basically going out of the comfort zone as a scientist, engaging with the practical world, communicating about those things, making how-to guidelines that are easy to understand for all these more voluntary people locally. And the third is the policy integration, because now you hit the roadblock, because the people locally, they're allowed to manage fish, but they are not allowed to restore the habitat. They need to get permissions by the water authority, by the nature conservation authority. You can imagine a person working voluntarily in these angling clubs is overwhelmed by these processes. And in the conservation as agencies, you have risk aversity. So it's, should we add wood or should we make a new shallow water zone? Maybe it's too risky. So in other words, the agencies have to make it easy for the local users to get permissions to implement this. And this is a policy or governance issue. If that's solved, I guarantee you this will be scaled very quickly because of the self-interest of people.
I know that Falling Walls has very good contacts with several very important people in Germany. Let's meet them afterwards, because it's so easy what you propose as a solution that it's almost mind-blowing that it doesn't happen.
Right.
Zahra.
Thank you. I mean, Robert said fantastically, and I can come back to what you said, because, I mean, from the researcher point of view, I think that if you want to scale up our research is to how we can set it in the holistic and real-world context. For example, when it comes to the cities, so we know that cities are facing, actually, the extreme events, floods, droughts, heat waves, at the same time, so we are emitting as well. So if you understand this whole real-world context, so then we can actually scale up our research into that perspective as well. So, and I believe that actually there are lots of fantastic solutions are out there, and we are also striving for more solutions, innovative solutions coming out. But what I see, one of the challenges that we are still, from the researcher point of view, and also from the decision makers or the people that are outside and they want to implement, is that how we can actually bridge falling down these walls and make the bridge actually between the science to reality, how we can implement these solutions. And so then we come to, I mean, you said it fantastically, Johanna, okay, how I can work with more cities. Exactly, because, for example, it took a long time to just convince Stockholm City that what we are doing, to make this trust, that these are the solutions, how we can use them, and how more cities can get involved, can actually learn from each other. Because maybe cities, they can learn from each other much easier than learning from me as a scientist, because they can say, oh, this city has trusted, So, but this is a really, good question. So how we can, if I can put it, foster this cross-sectoral partnership. So if we are partners together, so then maybe we can listen to each other better as well and trust.
I don't know if you work with Berlin already. I feel like sometimes Berlin currently feels like we're going back to the car cities of the 1960s. If I look at the plans that are happening in Berlin, so maybe there's somebody here from the city that we can connect you to in order to make the city more livable and more sustainable.
Thank
so
you.
It's actually
I think we have some agreement here on that, no?
Thank you. But That's fantastic, and I think that this is one of the things that challenges that actually, thanks to the Frontier Planet Prize, actually we got this visibility, we got this credibility, so people now approaching, they're investing, even my own university, the president has started to invest more in water and climate.
Well, that's fantastic. So that's one of the aims of the prize, is to foster the scientific community to do more, and if that is happening, that's brilliant. Now, we touched upon it, and let's try to tackle the last question before we give the floor to the audience. So you hinted to it, and I think Michiel also, but the other part of the equation is there enough science ready to tackle the problem? Because yesterday we heard some people say, very smart people saying, yeah, the science is there, we just need to implement. Well, I think it's not true. I mean, if you just take one example, clean batteries still we don't have. So as long as we don't have clean batteries, we don't have no clean energy transition. So do we really have all the science we need? And here I look first to our three guests and non-active science, let me put it this way, and then we give the floor again to Zahra and Robert. Michiel, let me start with you.
Well, I always look at three things. We have an energy transition, a material transition, and a protein transition. The last one is quite easy. Everyone can stop eating meat tonight.
We do.
We should, or much less. So that doesn't require a lot of technology. We know how to eat with beans,
yeah,
soya,
but a lot of behavioral change.
The second one, energy. Well, in solar, in wind, it's moving quite well. Fusion technology, we might need it. It's still 15, 20 years ahead. So there's a lot of to work. My biggest concern, but I'm coming from a textile world, in bio-based materials, we are nowhere. We have to, if we don't have petrol to fuel cars, we don't have polyester, polyamide, polystyrene, and polypropylene. So we have the whole transition of plastics, of textiles, of materials is still very early, and there's also a lack of interest of large corporations. And I would like to have more companies in that field in my portfolio. We have too little. So that's really a field where there should be much more. And where also the scaling problems are substantial, because a polyester factory is 800,000 tons. So it's not something you make in your backyard. So you have also to think of scale, not of reproducing, but basically no bigger. Otherwise, Shell wins.
Absolutely. So anyone looking for some funding with a good idea, the call is out. No, I'm raising the issue because remember, Robert and Zahra, when we had our... when you got your nomination and prize, we had the Director-General of DG Klima's speaking very clearly, saying Kurt van den Berg is probably the most powerful civil servant in Europe in this area, saying, I know what to do, but I don't have enough science to do it. So how do you see that? I know that you have some clear ideas on that also.
I mean, there's so much amazing science out there, and I certainly wouldn't discredit what we already know, but there's so much, some of the advantages of fundamental discovery-driven science are the things that we don't even know yet that we'll discover and where that leads, that serendipitous path. So I think I would humbly reject the idea that we already know everything we need to know. We don't know what we don't know, so I think it's exciting to see. I am so inspired by what I have seen from the Planet Prize and the breadth that's covered, but I also want to pick up on a couple of points from both of you too that's I think so important in thinking about how to make this actionable, and that is that so much of the science that I see in these national champions, international, are really these things that people care about, to your point, the things that hit home and they're visceral. And I think when that's the lens that we bring with the science, it sort of lets people put aside disagreements about maybe root causes and allows them to focus on how they can work together to tackle near-term priorities and also stay aligned around a shared longer-term vision and purpose. And so I think that that's really important. I also think there's, at least, I should speak for myself, but when I think of this wildfire world where so much of what we are doing, especially on like the community mitigation side of things, depends on individual agency, individual parcel owners, individual landowners. And I, for one, do not have a keen understanding of many of the decisions that our species makes. And so I think it's really important to think about behavioral science and trying to understand what makes people make the choices that they make. and especially the people who are making the decisions that are going to be really important for the changes that we need to see. So, so maybe a little bit of both of those, just thinking about the lens of the applicability and the things that really matter to people in their communities, and thinking about what we can learn from behavioral science along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Johanna, I know you have some views on that as well, no?
Yeah, I fully agree on the behavioral science aspect. I think it's linked to what I said earlier about tragedy of the commons. While that exists on a macro level, on a micro level with collaboration, it's much easier to solve. And there, I forgot her name, but we had this Nobel laureate a few years ago who demonstrated that if people work together in small groups, we can actually collectively solve problems.
Ostrom.
Oh, yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was her. So I think that relates to what you said about behavioral science, that in close communities and with micro solutions, we can actually overcome the problem. So to your question about do we need more science, absolutely. I think there's many problems unsolved, and I think the technological breakthroughs that we have, for example, in AI and in computer technologies, can help address these problems. I have big hopes when it comes to material science that AI enables us to discover and create new materials faster. I think there's some startups working on that problem that personally I find very I'm very hopeful that they will discover moths and other material-based things that will help us solve climate change easier. But I think we need both. We need more science on the natural sciences side, on the behavioral sciences side, but we also need implementation. Exactly. I think you sometimes also have this, oh yeah, we can solve climate change at some point in the future because we will be more innovative. I don't believe that. I think we need to implement the solutions that we have now, and at the same time develop solutions for the future.
But that's the Bill Gates point. So it will happen sui generis, don't worry. And it will not happen sui generis.
No, it will not.
No, but what is in your case? I mean, it's not a scientist's role is not to develop a handbook and to have a help desk and a phone line for a fishing community. So what is missing? You need a kind of national fishing organization that basically picks up your knowledge and it has a helpline for all these volunteers who want to do something. So with the neoliberal policies we have had across the world, we have destroyed all that layer of intermediation, and we have to bring it back. And that's not my task either, although we would like to fund a number of, let's say, social enterprises to do things like that. But there is something lacking that is beyond, let's say, what science can do, and also not always in the scope what scale-ups can do or corporates can do. So there's also a public mission, also in your area, where you need bodies doing that. In the Netherlands, we have these water boards. It doesn't sound what it is, but
isn't that also not a unique window for foundations to invest more in this kind of social interface?
No taxation. Yeah. Sorry.
You have a session on that? Sorry.
No. I mean, it's a public. Sorry. I think it's a public thing.
It is.
That's why we pay tax for.
I do. I mean, I think philanthropic funding can do some of that early accelerating and de-risking and demonstrating. And I also would be the first to acknowledge that philanthropic capital is a drop in the bucket next to the sources of public funding and private sector funding that could be unlocked if we have things aligned the right way. So I think philanthropic investments in very targeted ways can help with some of these pilots and scales, the scaling frameworks, but then it really needs to be something that we've done in a way that allows public agencies or public actors, the private sector, to really want to embrace it and take it and sustain it in the long run.
By the way, for your information, also for the audience, so we will, with Frontiers and the Foundation, we will have a science house in Davos, and these issues about how can we create new interfaces to bring it together and what kind of new mechanism can we invent is precisely at the core of our discussions there. So if you happen to hang around in Davos at the end of January, let us know, and I'm sure I can let you in for a while. So don't worry about. No, it's quite a serious invitation to all of you. Okay, we have a bit of time for Q&A in the audience. I don't know where the microphone manager, sorry. Just whoever you see, and I can't see it with the light. Sorry.
There's a lady.
We have 3 here.
One behind you.
Yeah. Should I start? Okay. Thanks for the panel, first of all, and an incredible moderation, Jean-Claude. I think it's the 3rd panel I'm hearing that you're moderating.
Say again?
Great. So a recurring theme I'm hearing on many panels is that we in Europe are quite dependent on US funding or on US as a partner to scale our innovation. So my question is actually mainly for Mr. Scheffer. Do you think Europe can be self-sufficient to kind of accelerate our innovation?
Well, there are two things. The concept the European Commission uses, and I'm quite in favor of that, is called open strategic autonomy. So we have to increase the strategic autonomy of Europe, but we can do that with friendly nations. That's one thing. The second thing is, I think Macron came with that figure at the Sorbonne last year. Every year, 800 billion of our savings go to the US, because we have savings. The US doesn't. And those savings are then going partly in venture capital, and venture capital invests in European companies. One of the things, I was going to say that in the conclusion, but I can say now, one of the things we have to do is to mobilize more our savings and our institutional capital, because a lot of our savings are in pension funds. Last week on Tuesday, the Commission announced an initiative of a scale-up fund, together with a number of pension funds, also mine, the Dutch civil servant pension fund, and the university pension fund. So we have to mobilize that capital better to become more independent, and we have the money, unlike the US. So we have to basically create a number of new financial products that basically we can put institutional capital together. And the other thing is, I happen to have a small heritage, but you need a lot of money as an individual if you want to invest in startups. If you have 100,000 euros, no, it's too small. So we also have to create saving products that people like us can say, okay, I would like to invest 5,000 or 10,000 euros in startups, which we did after the war. So it's something creating again the financial market like we had in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was told that the pension funds in Europe sit on 3 trillion. So can you imagine 3 trillion? Give us 10% and we solve a lot of problems. In particular, your anglers. We just buy all the companies.
And the biggest one is the Dutch pension fund for civil service. They have 500 billion.
Is it?
Yeah. 500 billion.
The Dutch, yeah.
If they put 1% in startups, it completely changes the market.
Absolutely.
The financial market. Yeah.
Another question here.
Hi, thank you for a really nice and inspiring discussion. So I'm a scientist and also a co-founder, and we're talking a little bit about micro-level solutions are already existing, and scalability is the next step. And one of the main bottlenecks that we encounter for scalability is also regulatory bottlenecks. I work with designing alternatives to biopesticides, and in this space we say that the startup world is already saturated, and yet solutions and products are not things that are available to farmers. And that's because the regulatory process is so bureaucratic and there's so much capital and time involved. So as researchers, as venture capitalists, do you think we can do something to push some of these boundaries of regulation, make it more forward-thinking?
Johanna, you want to take this one?
I think I can react in terms of, I think we must. I think bureaucracy and the path dependency that we have created through the institutions that have served us in the past 80 years or so, especially after World War II, are now sometimes hesitating or stopping this progress. So I think it's important also, to get regulation, the executive around the table, to think about how can it be broken up. How can permits be much faster for people who bring new innovations to the table? I think that's definitely an issue to work on.
You want to react to that, please?
Yeah, it's of course a bit different case, but I can just tell from my own experience, when we initially approached the agencies to give permissions to these habitat restorations, many were resisting because of the risk averseness that I told you about. And the key was to actually and truly engage in transdisciplinary interaction. So that means integrating the local stakeholders, one of which are the agencies, in the whole process of science. And they became, we brought them into the local lakes, they came to visit, we talked to them, and through this, they saw it's not a risky enterprise. It's only win-win in this particular case. I think it's very different in yours. But this then led to very slim decision processes. Like from an environmental impact assessment that would take 3 years to something that is just to be announced. And it was the trust building, the integration in the process, them seeing it's not risky, And then it actually was a very fast process. But of course, on the scientist, you have to engage in the process. And many don't do that because it's time, right?
No, that's really interesting what you say, and that gives me an idea. We should maybe develop a mentorship program with all our scientists, because you have so much experience that young scientists, even younger than you, can use. Zahra.
Yeah, I mean, it has been already said about this policy integration, and I think that if we look at this problem from the beginning, from the base, that actually how we can embed the research outcomes directly to this framework of the policy framework and funding mechanism. So maybe this is something that we can build these bridges or this trust. And also as a scientist, we have also experienced that if there is any incentives actually, or it's going to be much easier, for example, in our case, for the cities to be able to implement the research results, outcomes in the reality. But when it comes, for example, with the climate mitigations and then climate adaptation, so there are different rules. Our EU wants to have, climate neutrality by 2045, and then Sweden has its own, goal, and then it comes to the cities, they have their own goals, and then there are so many goals that they are going together as well. So I think that some of the regulation, maybe they are necessary, they should be there to give us a direction that where we should go, but at the same time, actually, it should be this policy integration that can actually make it clear for us as a scientist to embed our knowledge into what the policy frameworks and, So I think that both are regulatory. I mean, this regulatory is needed somehow, but somehow it also need to be more transparent.
There is room for one more question, I think. Yes, over there.
Thank you. Yeah, so my name is Nondas, and I'm from Brazil, and I really enjoy the topic of engaging local stakeholder for scaling up climate solution. And however, I still miss South Globe participation, I think, in this discussion about advanced climate solution. And Brazil is hosting COP30, yes, starting now exactly. And when we think about our last agreement, I think we need to have the courage to say that we failed in our last agreements for climate change. And I would like to understand how Europe sees the responsibility, but also how to support these new agreements that we must do for supporting advancing climate solution, and mainly for forest landscape restoration. And also how your organizations can support, for example, organizations like my local organization that are dealing with forest restoration and indigenous knowledge. What are the opportunities that we can reach to also access financing and fundraising opportunity? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a quite important problem. By the way, one of our first international champions, Carlos Perez, was precisely working on the issue you raised at the end, so how to use indigenous communities and so on to increase biodiversity in managing the Amazon, so to speak. But Michiel, you wanted to react to that. And you have to do it in fast forward. We have 1 minute and a half.
Okay, the best person to answer your question is my colleague sitting here, because he's in the international department. But what we saw very briefly since the 25th of January is the huge interest of countries to join the Horizon program. So to be part of the European funding mechanism, you have to pay as well. But the other thing is as well, I went to Kenya, for example, and the time is gone that we go to Kenya and explain what they should do. So we also have to organize a process by which the South expresses their vision on science and technology issues and comes with a roadmap. So that's also part of, let's say, having that, and that is urgently needed.
Okay.
But yeah, we are paid by the European taxpayers, so if you don't mind, we think of Europe first, but it should be an open strategic thing, so inviting others, but also inviting others to be active in the process.
But I do agree that rethinking the mechanisms is essential, rethinking the international mechanism, and it's one of the issues we would also like to look at in Davos. So we have a few seconds left, and I hope I get a bonus from the organizer. So for the last question, so the Folding Walls always want every panel to end with one question that everyone can answer shortly. And that is, what is the next step that needs to be taken to break down the wall between, in our case, science and impact? So I start with the guest and then I go to the scientist. Johanna.
I probably have several conclusions, but I will do the corporate world since I represent it. I think every corporate organization should have a systematic engagement with the science community to identify what is out there and how they can take it in their processes and in the work that they do. That's what I would advocate for with my organization and with my clients.
It's an interesting idea. Thank you. Michiel, you already hinted at what you want, but please.
Well, we fund too many projects that get 79 years old, American people older. I would like to have more projects that think of my grandchildren.
That's a good one. Yes, thank you. Genevieve.
I'd say I think to be able to harness the power and the promise of science and innovation, I'm going to draw forward what we've been talking about all around, which is really just the importance of working together. And again, from the wildfire perspective, we think a lot about understanding end user needs and making sure that we're working closely with end users. Talk about having people come in from agencies and getting over the risk aversity that way. I think it's also important to understand their constraints and their needs, and so it can work both ways. So I think that's a really important piece. But I think it's okay to have silos of excellence in sectors as long as we have bridges between them. So we need to build and nurture those bridges and make sure that we're making sure that those connections are working. And I have to say thank you to the Falling Walls Summit and to Frontiers Planet Prize for showing us how to do that. So.
Thank you. Robert.
Take implementations that are done as experiments and evaluate them properly over time. The project cycles are too short for biodiversity outcomes to be revealed. 2 to 3 years is not the case. But there's a lot of action going on in restoration across the landscape. If we can design systems to monitor that well, we will learn a lot. And these projects will be 5 to 10 years of time. And this is currently not done.
Fantastic. Zahra.
I believe that collaboration is really essential here. So that the science that we can provide, innovation, the novelty that we have within our science can reach the right people to be able to implement it.
Absolutely. And my 3 seconds is that as director of the Planet Prize, that irrespective of the cynicism in some parts of the world and by some ex-funders, we still have a lot of volunteerism and very smart people working in the right direction. And that I think we should look at, and not at the long tail of idiots that say other things. So thank you very much, and I hope you get away some energy and perspectives for your own work in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.